Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's session of SecPod webcast. I'm Jexir, your host. To SecPod webcast, we bring you the latest happenings at SecPod and exciting stuff that we work on to prevent cyber attacks for enterprise IT security teams globally. Today's session of the SecPod Labs Intelligence series is going to be on impact of Spring4shell vulnerability and other critical vulnerabilities that we discovered between January to March of this year 2022. Before we begin, I'd like to remind all of us that a recorded version of this webinar will be available on Bright Talk and our YouTube channel. We will also send a recording to your email after this session so you can watch it and share with others in your team. Towards the end of the session, we will have a Q&A session. We'll love to hear from you. Um, how, what value did you find this in this webinar? So with that, I'd like to introduce today's presenters. I have with me Virendra and Pooja from SecPod Security Intelligence team. They're here to talk about critical vulnerability discovered during the first quarter of this year, which is January to March. And we are here to answer all your questions. You can post your questions in the chat box below your Pride Talk player. So, talking about today's agenda, we're going to discuss. Um, we have come up with a quarterly vulnerability report that we have published, and what does that report discuss? Then we're going to talk about Spring4shell and other critical vulnerabilities highlighted in the report, and also shed some details of that. And towards the end, we would have a question and answer session to answer all your questions. So, what is this vulnerability report that we prepared? So, your team at SecPod, um, what we did was as part of our routine activities, we did do prepare this report of all the vulnerabilities that gets discovered in these months. Um, and in this quarterly report, we have discussed all the vulnerabilities in January to March 2022, and we've also talked about what were the top affected vendors and products. We have talked about what are the critical vulnerabilities and highlighted the top 10 amongst all critical vulnerabilities. Then we have also uh, discussed about Spring4shell, which is known to be the new Log4shell. And the report also goes on to discuss insights, to present insights and predictions on what to expect in the rest of the year. A version of this report is available on our website, and you can um, go to www.secpod.com and download your copy from there. We would also be sharing a copy of this report to all the viewers of this uh, session. Talking about a few highlights of the report of what we found, and as reported to not just NVD but other databases, and what and also covered by SecPod. There were 6,309 vulnerabilities that were discovered in those 3 months, and we saw around a 10% increase from the previous quarters, right? And we also there was 15 zero-day vulnerabilities that occurred in those 3 months, that were in the limelight. And amongst all these vulnerabilities, there were 33 widely exploited and kept IT security teams on their toes. And also, there were 65 web browser vulnerabilities that impacted a lot of users globally. So it was not a surprise that there were countless updates from all the browsers in the first quarter, and it keeps continuing now. In this report, we have also, based on what has been happening for over the years and what we saw also continued in the first quarter of the year, and also we are almost in June. So also in what happened in May and April. So we have, based on all of that information, we've also made predictions what's going to continue happening for the rest of the year. So yes, get your copy um, to go into more details on what those critical vulnerabilities are, and then also how to what you need to do to discover those, discover and fix those in your IT infrastructure. With that, I'll introduce my colleague Virendra and Pooja to talk about Spring4shell and all the critical vulnerabilities and high fidelity attacks that we discovered in the first quarter. Virendra?
Yeah, thank you, Jaxi. Thank you for the introduction. So, I'm Virendra. So, today we'll be trying to understand about Spring Shell vulnerability, and is it bigger than Log4shell vulnerability? And we'll see how easy it is to exploit Spring4shell vulnerability. I'll show the demo, and also will show how Saner can detect this vulnerability. So the to start with, so we'll try to understand what is Spring Shell. The Spring Shell is a framework yeah, which is used by many enterprise and developed by the VMware, and it's a Java-based platform. So in the in the end of March 30, like March, end of March. So this vulnerability got discovered, and a few security vendors observed there is exploitation is happening, which is being used, which is Spring4shell vulnerability. So what are the different versions are affected? So it affects. There are around three different ranges, like 5.3.0 to 5.3.17, and 5.2.0 to 5.2.19, and all older versions are affected by this vulnerability. And so who are using this framework? What all vendors are using this product? So basically, this framework is used by various vendors such as Cisco, Oracle, SonicWall, and Siemens. So as they are using this framework in their products, so they are also vulnerable. So as a part of this, they also released various security advisories and patches to fix these vulnerabilities. So what is the solution? So this is it is affecting various versions, and what is the solution for this? So the main solution is to update the Spring Framework shell to 5.3.18 and 5.2.20 or higher. So if you have any vulnerable version of Spring Framework, so it is advisable to upgrade to these versions. So there are workarounds in the initial stage, as patches were not released after we vendors saw the like security community saw the exploitations. That time they few people released workarounds such as it works on a specific version of Tomcat. So and it requires a specific version of Java, which is like Java 9 and above. So some workarounds were there earlier, like downgrading, which is not advisable. But yeah, that's a workaround if your application or application which is being used is affected. And there are other things like upgrading Tomcat. Tomcat also, it's not vulnerable to this, but they released an upgrade which is quite, it is stopping the attack basically. So these are the things, and why it is so critical, and uh, why it is considered that it is very dangerous is one is it allows this vulnerability allows a remote code execution which is unauthenticated. So that is a one very important aspect, because various vendors are using the application, and to execute remote code it doesn't require any authentication. So that's the reason the CVSS score has been assigned to this vulnerabilities 9.8, which is critical. So now let's try to understand. We few months back we saw Log4j going all over the world, and it is getting exploited, and it's a library, so it is being exploited by various used by various products, and I think the count is still, I think, getting updated. Still, it is happening. So is this vulnerabilities as critical as the Log4j? Not very much. Not like we cannot say it is equivalent to Log4j or not. The vulnerability is not as bad as Log4j. The main reason is this expression requires various conditions, and also it includes various other complexities as well. So which includes, like as I mentioned earlier, it requires JDK 9 Java or JDK version 9 or higher, and Spring version, vulnerable version of Spring framework. And also there are few features like features or functions like request mapping annotation and plain old Java object POGO. So which is these things need to be used in the application. Then only it is vulnerable. Due to these things, it makes a little less dangerous than Log4j. And on like Sans also released notification of exploitation on March 31st. So within a week, AV vendors also discovered that threat actors are weaponizing this vulnerability uh, and exploited deployed Mirai botnets as well. Few vendors discovered that it is being exploited as it's unauthenticated, and it's easy to pipeline it also because it is unauthenticated, and you can execute the remote code. Once you can execute the remote code, you can deploy, or you can do various other harms. So let's try to jump into the demo, how easy it is to exploit. That way, people will understand how critical it is. I'll share my screen. Yeah, I'm sharing my screen. So I hope you guys please interrupt me if you are not able to see the screen. And so the presently there is a wonderful version of Log4 Spring Shell basically is deployed on one of the system for demo purpose. So this is what you guys are seeing. This is a exploitation. Like this is a website, and when we go to this URL where we like will deploy the shell, which is like web shell, and try to execute few commands. So as we can see, this is 404. We can see that it is not exploitable. Means it does not exist presently on that system. As you can see, it is 2.23, and this is also 2.123. Both are same. So let's try to run the exploit quickly, which is there are various POCs exploits are available in the wild. Many people have developed it. Uh, So this is a, thing which we are going to run. So we have just what just show what we I am trying to run. Run.sh is having this command, and which just for ease purpose I included in the run.shell, and I'm running. So as soon as I run it, as I can see, it is performing some actions. It is sending an exploit, and yeah, it deployed a shell. So as we saw, this was a 404 earlier. Let's try to access again, same, because shell is been deployed, and this IP of this system is uh, completely different. It is different completely in the different IP, and we didn't pass any credentials over here. Let's try to execute just ID standard exploitation thing. Yeah, here you go. So whenever we execute a command, so it uploaded a shell which accepts it uploaded JSP shell, web shell, which expects any command passed via the command parameter. So here we executed ID. Let's see, we'll try to see. As we can see, it is that application is deployed as root. So we can see that we can execute any command, as we can see here. So we can see the files. Also, we can various other complex commands also can be executed. So this makes it very dangerous. So let's try to understand how Saner can detect this vulnerability. Let's try to give a little demo of how Saner is helping this. So as you can see here, this is our Saner application, and we have in the same network we have two network scanners deployed, and here are the devices presently. As you can see, these are the devices presently. Two devices are there, and they have uh, they both are network scanner. For demo purpose we kept it, and as you can see presently it is not showing to 2.123, which is uh, yet to be scanned. So what we have done is, these are the network scanners. So what we have done is, we have created a target, and given some ports and all other things required targets, and policy. Let's see what we have selected. Here we have selected Spring Shell, sorry, Spring Core. Yeah, these two are one is detect script, and the other one is the script which sends a request and try to understand whether target is vulnerable or not based on the response it receives. So these are the things we have configured here. So from one of the systems, I'll just quickly launch the network scan. So scan is initiated. So this scan will take around 30 minutes, less than a minute, I can say. So when we tested earlier, it took around 30 seconds. So that's approx thing. So now in the back end, it will be scanning ports, what ports are open, what services are running on that host, uh, and and also it will launch those detect script, Spring Core, and Spring4shell vulnerability scripts. It will launch them and try to detect whether it is vulnerable or not. So the still scan is happening. Hope it will soon finish. So this Spring4shell is like it's unauthenticated, and you can it's easy to exploit. That makes it more dangerous. Yeah, it finished. As you can see here, it took 32 seconds. It scanned two scripts, these two scripts, and it uploaded one result. This one. Let's try to understand. See, let's refresh the page. Let's see whether it's detected. Yes, it is detected. This is the one, 2.123. Let's dive deep into it. Let's try to understand what all it detected. So when we dive into it, as we can see, it detected Spring4shell vulnerability, which is assigned with the CVE 2022-22-965. So these are the details. It gives the little details on the vulnerability and few links for the reference. You can check it out. And misconfigurations, we have not selected anything. We have selected only two scripts, so it did not. And assets, yeah, it detected Spring Core, which was detected from a remote thing. And ports, yeah, it detected there are total four ports: 22, 139, 445, and 8080. All these are running SMB. Even it's a Linux system, it's running in SMB 139, 445. And services, it can detect HTTP, SSH, and net bias. So these are the things Saner is able to identify, and it's able to find that vulnerability on the remote system. So this will help, like in the like Saner now, like we don't know, many times we might have an application which is used by Spring Shell. In that case, a Spring Core or Spring framework is being used. So in that case, it's hard to find out. So we can utilize Saner now to find out what all targets are vulnerable to this Spring4shell. Similar to that, there are various other critical vulnerabilities also can be detected using Sena now application. So that is on the demo side. So we are able to, in this demo, we are able to find out what all things we have done. Means how easy it is to exploit the vulnerability just with a simple some 50 to 60 lines of Python code can drop a web shell, and how it is like Saner also helps us to detect the vulnerability. So that is all about the Spring4shell vulnerability, and more details will be share like more uh, high fidelity attack or more zero day attacks which are occurred in the last quarter will be discussed by the Pooja. Handing over to you, Pooja.
Yeah, thank you, Virendra. Uh, Jagsir, can you share the screen? I mean, slides?
Hey Pooja, hi. So yes, I brought up
Yes,
the yeah. So you want the
yes,
slides,
yes,
right? So I put up the
yes,
slides
yes,
here. Okay.
yes. Okay, so Viru just spoke about the Spring4 shell, which made a lot of noise in the first quarter this year. I would be starting off with the dirty pipe vulnerability. I believe many of us may not even have heard of it, but it's a very critical vulnerability that did not make much news. So this is assigned the CVID 2022-0847. It's a local privilege escalation vulnerability in the Linux kernel. So if you were to go through our report, you would see that year on year and this already in the first quarter, we have seen huge number of Linux kernel vulnerabilities. So why this vulnerability is called dirty pipe? Because pipes are being manipulated to write into pages in memory where we do not have access to, which is why it is named as dirty pipe. This issue was initially identified by Max Kelman. He immediately released two exploits. One of them let you overwrite the etc password. You could either change the salt for a root user, or you can actually add a new admin account. And then once you have access to the machine, you can revert back the older password files so that you're not detected. Or the other like exploit which was shared could override the SUID binary files like sudo, which again gave you root access. So why did I mention that this should have made much more news than that what it did is because almost all the devices that I mean a huge chunk of devices that are out there, they're affected, like Ubuntu, Debian, Amazon Linux, Android devices that were using the latest Linux kernel were affected, all the latest devices. Then Google Home devices like Chromecast was affected, speakers and displays were affected. And vendors did take some amount of time after the exploit was publicly known to patch the issue. So you could have an Ubuntu server running where all that an attacker needs to do is to ensure he sends a shell script to you that you can run. So many of us might actually download something from GitHub without going through the POC and run it in our environments. That is all that is needed for this attack to happen and gain root access. Once you have root access, they can start moving laterally. So this particular vulnerability, which allowed any unprivileged user to write etc passwords or other critical files, was something that went unnoticed, is what I believe. So going to the next CV. So this is a type confusion vulnerability in Google's Chrome's V8 JavaScript engine. Oh, 1 minute. Okay, sorry. Yes, in Chrome's Chromium-based browsers, JavaScript the V8 JavaScript engine is the critical part of a Chromium browser, and any vulnerability that we have seen so far in it is very critical. Though Chrome did not reveal a lot of details about this vulnerability to contain the attack, it was already known that there was a malware named Redline Stealer malware, which was actually doing like it was collecting information from systems like password, username, and other stuff. When dark web logs were, as per a report, when dark web logs were checked, it was identified that a huge number of organizations were actually affected by these issues. And when you look at the impact, around 2 billion users are known to be impacted. Why? Because all of us use browsers, and all the Chromium browsers were known to be affected. So like Chrome, Microsoft Edge, Amazon Silk, Opera, Brave, Samsung Internet, Vivendi, and Yandex. So all these were known to be affected. Along with the information that was revealed was this particular vulnerability had already gained its foothold on organizations such as Axis Bank, Geo, Cisco, Samsung, Zoom. It from the dark web reading, it could be a log reading, it could be identified that all of these are actually being exploited even before the patch is made available. Third just in the report we observed that 65 browser vulnerabilities were reported in the first quarter. So we do year on year, we are seeing an increase in the number of vulnerabilities that get reported with respect to browsers or in the operating system. So Apple, a lot of us believe that Apple operating systems are pretty safe. But again, we did see multiple 0 days in Apple in 2021. The count was around 12, and now again in first quarter of 2022 we already see 50 days that are open, and for sure the going forward this trend might go upwards. In this particular vulnerability, which is 2022-22675, it is an out of bounds write vulnerability in Apple AVD component. It's a kernel extension. AVD is a kernel extension used for audio and video decoding. Apple claimed that this flaw was already being exploited, but it did not publish further details to contain the attack. What this vulnerability can actually do is, again, give complete access of your system to attackers. What are the versions that were affected? The latest version of Mac, which is Monterey, then again iOS and iPad OS. For most iPhone and iPad were affected. I'll just show you, now that we discussed all these 0 days, I'll just show you a trend that we observed as part of the research that our team was putting to create the report. We observed that month on month, the number of high fidelity attacks has been increasing. So in the first month, we saw 5 0 days, then we saw 3, followed by 8. So it is very necessary that we, just a second. it is very necessary that we find ways to identify these within our network. How we can go about doing that? I'll just show you. So I've just logged into this and I have scanned all the devices within our network to identify if we can see these vulnerabilities or the 0 days that we just discussed. I'm going to the VM page.
Hey, Pooja, just to make sure that you're sharing your screen.
Oh, just a
Uh,
second.
yeah,
You're able to see now?
I believe it's coming up, but not
Okay.
yet.
No?
Uh, s- Still no.
Just a second. I'll
Yeah,
just
sure,
reshare it.
sure. Yeah,
Just see?
yeah,
Yes.
yes,
Okay,
it
great.
works now. Yeah.
Yes. So if I were to figure out in my network, am I affected by dirty pipe? So this is the section that describes about the high fidelity attacks that are or the exploits that we know are existent within our network. This information is mainly collected by our security research team, which researchers day in and day out tries to figure out the kind of malwares or exploits that are being used in the wild and starts collecting as much information as possible and creates this database which we can use for identifying if we are affected. Similarly, if I want to see Medline malware. So both of these are actually present in my network. So if we were to like prioritize patching, and I would want to know what are the actual vulnerabilities that are critical, and I would want to address them. This is very easy to identify using the high fidelity attacks part of our product. I'll just show you how you could just go about remediating it. Both for convenience sake, both of these I have combined in a single asset. So one of those, the CV 2022-1096. Yeah, so it is present here, Chromium browser, and then we have the Linux kernel vulnerability, dirty pipe. So we can go about patching both of them. I would just need to create a remediation task for high fidelity attacks. Immediate, and you can choose other options as like if you wanted to reboot right now or later on. So what basically this does is help me identify quickly any such exploit kits or malwares that are known to the public, and if any of the endpoints within my network are affected, it would also help me immediately patch them. Why this is critical is because once for example, if dirty pipe is open within my environment, once they have attacked one of the machine, it is just about moving laterally, and most of the malwares that are created, they bunch up multiple issues together so that they never get identified. So yes, this would help us identify and quickly remediate any such critical issues that might exist within our network. Yes, that's all that I had, Jaxi. Over to you.
Thanks, Pooja. That's That's interesting, sir. Now, one thing I wanted to understand from both of you, right? So you talked about all these critical vulnerabilities, and of course, I mean, IT security teams usually, I mean, most of their um, work goes around these vulnerabilities, right? And during this research that you were conducting, how many vulnerabilities do you see impacting the end users or enterprise employees, right? More than your server infrastructure or your enterprise infrastructure.
So I don't think we have like a particular count of the number of vulnerabilities that we see, but I think if out of the 6,000 vulnerabilities, majority of the vulnerabilities, I mean, a major chunk of the vulnerabilities would at least major endpoint would be affected at least by around 2,000, 3,000 vulnerabilities.
Okay, okay, good. That's a good amount of vulnerabilities, right? Impacting the endpoints. Okay. So with that, I think we have arrived at our Q&A session. So let me just pull through if we have any questions from our audiences. Mm, okay, a couple of questions that we have. So how do I download the report? So it's pretty simple. You can go to our website secpod.com, and under resources you'll find the report listed on the top, and you can request your copy. You'll get it on your email. It's pretty straightforward. And other thing is, for all of our viewers, we're going to send a copy to your email that you can read, go through, and share with your colleagues. Next question we have is, after exploiting Spring4shell vulnerability, what actions threat actors can perform? I believe Virendra or Pooja, any of you can take this up.
Okay, I'll take that up. As I talked about, web for shell vulnerability. So the first thing what they do is they'll try to deploy any web shell or try to execute some specific code. And once they are successful, they'll try to get they'll try to get some sensitive information or deploy more malwares or hidden trojans where they can anytime they'll be able to, even though after patching, they'll be able to get hold of that system. So it is quite possible that once the threat actors exploit it, normally they will try to, many times they will try to keep themselves low level, so that or make very less noise unless they want to do a ransomware attack where they will encrypt all the data and try to ask for the ransom. Otherwise, they will stay low and stay hidden as much as possible. And if sometime what happens is, what we have seen is, if application is deployed with that like Spring4shell, right? Its application, it's deployed as a non-root user or less privileged user. So what threat actors do is, first they will get into the system. Once they are into the system, but they cannot do much because the privileges are not there for that application, how it is running. So they, as Pooja mentioned, like dirty pipe, right? So they will use such a vulnerabilities again to become a root or escalate the privilege. So they will, in that case, they will utilize both of these vulnerabilities, uh, dirty pipe vulnerability and Spring4shell vulnerability, both combined together. They will be like, they will get hold of complete system. So that is how normally threat actors go.
Okay. I think we have another follow-up to that. Does Spring4shell require authentication to exploit?
No, it doesn't require an authentication. That's what it makes more dangerous. Any vulnerability which where remote execution or remote command is possible without an authentication, all the vulnerabilities are dangerous. Especially if it is listening on the any port, and if it is a SaaS application and it is out like anyone in the world can access that application, that makes more scary. Like it becomes more scary. So with that, authentication is one first step of defense where it will block majority of the attacks. So if vulnerabilities uh, doesn't require authentication, then it becomes more scary. In this Spring4shell, it doesn't require an authentication.
Okay, thanks, Viru. I think we have another question. Should we only prioritize patching the critical issues shared during this webinar? I believe Pooja or Viru,
Yeah.
anybody can take it.
I think I can take it. No, it is not like we'll only prioritize the vulnerabilities shared here because we will not be doing that, mainly because anything that is not so critical can be combined with multiple other vulnerabilities that we get to know, and then it can actually lead to like a breach. To prevent that, yes, we would have to patch any vulnerability that is open, but in cases where you have to choose between the critical vulnerability where root access is available versus something that is low severity, then you might need to first prioritize the ones that are critical, and then maybe plan your patching activity to ensure that all the other issues are resolved as well.
Okay, okay, yeah, okay. That's a good guidance, Pooja. Thank you. So I think with that we can wrap up our Q&A. For those of you, if you have any other questions, you can uh, send us an email to info@secpod.com, and we'll pretty much, whether it's Viru or Pooja or any other experts from our team, will make sure that we answer all your questions. With that, I think we are uh, pretty much sorted and towards the end of today's session. And before we go, I would like to tell all of our audience that SecPod's cyber hygiene platform is an advanced vulnerability management solution, and you can utilize it to discover vulnerabilities, install patches, comply with regulatory standards, get asset exposure, risk exposure on all your assets, implement security controls, and a lot more. And you can request a free trial by going to www.secpod.com. And once again, we have a recorded version available. We'll have a recorded version available on Bright Talk and our YouTube channel. We'll also send you an email with the exact URLs to those recordings. Please keep tuned to SecPod webcast, and we'll see you on our next session. Thanks, Viru and Pooja. Thanks for your valuable time, and
Thank you.
um, I wish
Thank you, Jason.
we wish a happy time ahead to our entire audience. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.